Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The Dharma talk title, a little bit long, is, what is the title?
Receive more, produce less.
Very good, thank you. For so long I couldn't remember it. What was it again?
Receive more, produce less.
Receive more, produce less. So simply put, it's something I've been talking about over and over again for years in different ways. Necessary to continue to talk about this. It can be described lots of different ways. Just listen. Stop producing. Stop yammering away just because that relieves your mind stream of the tension that is being produced by whatever. Fear, hope, agitation, so on and so forth. So what am I saying? Basically, simply listen, observe. Observe. You're learning to do what I'm talking about here on the cushion. That's fairly radical and minimal. Sit down, hold very still. You're producing very, very little. You're still breathing, more than likely. Your blood is flowing. You're doing quite a bit of production just to even be here as a human being. But by sitting still on the cushion, taking a symmetrical posture that indicates a kind of balance, hold very still, and receive. And learn, train yourself so that whatever arises in the mind stream, just receive, don't produce anything. And in the process of doing that, we end up seeing how much we continue to produce and evaluate and judge and conclude and blame this, blame that. So when I say, what was that I said? Produce more, receive less, something like that. Even that works if you understand it. If you understand it, everything works. If you understand deeply what this is, which I am encouraging you to do, everything works. Everything works. Everything is as it should be, as it is. And the theistic mind, the logical mind, the reasonable mind, the challenging mind, the warlike mind is going to go to right and wrong. Well, you can't really say that, because what about all the people who are starving? What about all the people who are being abused? What about? Okay, well, go ahead. That's what you want to do? Then operate in then. But you don't need to sit here and look at the wall. I would forget about looking at the wall. Forget about training your mind. Just spend the rest of the lifetime fighting with everything and agreeing with everything. You could do that's an option. I'm receiving the sounds of my stomach right now. It's saying, I can't quite understand that language. Has anybody ever deciphered growls coming from a stomach? The high frequency means this, the low frequency. Somebody's done this. Everybody's figuring everything out all the time, everywhere, and coming up with what? Ideas, conclusions, opinions. It's not that you won't continue to produce, but the receiving aspect of consciousness has been so transformed and so deeply committed to through your vow to be with all things, that even what you're producing is observed. Even if you're just seeing the tail feathers of it, you're observing it. You realize what you just said to that person. You realize that this person said this, and then you said that. And you don't necessarily go in and correct that, because that gets you out of response? Well, at least I know what I'm doing. Well, at least you know what I'm talking about. All of you do. How do I know about it? I do it. That's how I know. And you notice I didn't say I've done it. Well, I've done that, but no, I've got it all together. That's a misunderstanding, a huge one. You can't go in there with logic, particularly, and sort that out so you finally, now you what, understand. That's why if you hear me talk about the teachings, you have one person that is ready to rattle forth about the nature of reality based on whatever teaching, no matter how complicated. Samdhinamrachana Sutra, complicated. Thomas Cleary rambled on about it in Buddhist Yoga. I know we studied it. Didn't we study that? Several of the other people have done the same thing. Does not mean you have to understand it that way. That's what I say. What you need to do if you're listening to me is study. What? Receive, but don't produce an understanding. Ego mind wants to get to the point, and those of you who are cursed with a powerful intellect will abandon your true nature for thoughts about your true nature, and live in that kind of structure. I think I know what this means. I can understand. I know what Vasubandhu is saying. I even know what his brother is saying, if in fact was his brother. We go on and on and on, producing. 2 people, just 3 people, writing, making notes. Good idea. Taking notes is a good idea. So I say, study it, but you don't have to understand when I'm saying that. Of course, you could understand it, but if you put that on yourself, then it'll be every time you go to study, you'll have some kind of presumption that you should understand in a certain way, like the person next to you does. You assume they do because they're able to talk about it differently, or able to ask questions that sound fancier than the ones you're able to come up with. You might have a deeper understanding of what this is about than the person who can characterize that conceptually and actually make it look like they could write a commentary on the Diamond Sutra. So produce less, receive more. And when you do produce, whatever you do produce spontaneously out of that open dimension I'm calling receiving, you're going to do some producing out of that, but it comes out of the reception. And then it is in line with the teaching we call Pratitya Samutpada, or dependent origination, or nothing comes from its own side as an individual handprint. Nothing is separated fundamentally. The appearance is separation, the fundamental nature is not separate. The realization cannot be tracked. This realization happens in a realm, in a dimension, using those relative terms, that the thinking process can't get into because of its very nature of thinking is polarized. Just like the whole world is polarized. We have night and day. Should I go down the list? Up and down, back and forth, night and day. Should and shouldn't, could be, predetermined, and what's that other one? Oh, fated, and then free will. That's another one that people who have very powerful intellects will take apart and make their whole life about the philosophy of free will. I think Nietzsche did quite a bit of that kind of work for us, but had no teacher. I'm not saying he didn't have some teachers, but he didn't have a teacher who teaches, who points at the absolute. And don't misunderstand. I'm not saying I'm a teacher who points at the absolute.
Short of bowing, can we produce without abandoning the receiving?
You can, if the production is just coming out spontaneously, and there's no further post-it notes added onto it, no further commentary added onto it, no elaboration on it that helps protect, shield the imaginary self that is operating out of open fear. Go ahead.
Should have gone. Is withholding production another layer on it?
On what? On it? On what?
I don't know.
On it rhymes with bonnet. Does that help? Another on it. Say more about that. It's a good area. Don't have to escape.
I don't know how to go into it.
Well, then say the question again. Did you remember what you said? Say it again.
I don't.
Actually, don't remember what you asked me. Isn't that interesting? Do I remember what you asked me? Does anybody remember what he asked, other than those who have recorders? Does anybody actually remember? What did he say?
I think it was, is withholding production another layer?
That's really close. That's probably it. Does that help? What's the shrug for? What's that? What's that? What is that? What is that an expression of? What's that a production of?
Dismissal.
It is. Thank you. That's called awareness. The concept of dismissal is not awareness so much as you're aware of the underlying intention behind what you just did. And what was it again?
Is withholding production another layer?
It can be if you think that sitting practice is getting you somewhere, because withholding production is a way of talking about sitting meditation. Shikantaza is minimalized, just sit down and just as little as you can, as much as you can. Might be better just not producing. If you're holding still, holding a symmetrical posture, and you're sitting there for a couple of hours, you're probably producing quite a bit just based on the karma that even brought you into this realm in the first place. But by sitting still and watching the movement, you are using, you could say, the awareness to just watch what's continuing to ramp up or occur or flow outward towards the world, towards what's happening. I don't feel good. This doesn't feel good. My thoughts are being too speedy. I'm all over the place. Those kinds of evaluations. Need to see that, you might have to distance yourself from, might have to set up an artificial situation, which is what Shikantaza is. I think Coben once said something like, at some point we just sit down. He was just talking about a very simple way of talking about meditation. We just sit there. And that could be, even though we have a structure, we have a monastery, you might have a meditation room in your house where you go into practice. You might have forms that you do, but actually it's just a very radical and simple, radical meaning root, not radical meaning against form or breaking the law. It's a different, they're using radical in an odd kind of way. But return to just this simple situation. Watch what keeps going. Kevin.
Kevin Bowing, you earlier said something along the lines about not correcting oneself if you see that you're producing, because the correction might be a way of avoiding responsibility. For me, like taking responsibility often shows up as a comment like, well, that was a little intense or whatever. So how do we take responsibility, or what does taking responsibility look like without commentary? Bowing.
Okay, very good. Well, to begin with, it is seeing the commentary. Here's what happens, and then I'm going to use your words. Well, that might be a little bit much, what I just did. So there's some commentary there, but then to try to stop that from happening with some kind of artificiality, or kind of adding another thing on. I need to stop that. More commentary. The first commentary was appropriate. That's a little much. But then we don't. There's no corpses in the field. Not killed anyone. A very simple gesture of just being with all things. And being with all things might show up as that first thought about it, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, first thought, best thought. He didn't even mean thoughts, but how else are you going to say it? First, whatever, that's it. Might be a little much. So keeping it very simple. There's still a slight commentary as we practice, as we go on in our life and practice more and more. There'll be always a little bit of a commentator behind, a watcher of the watcher happening there, but it doesn't have much personality to it. It has very little agenda and probably won't come up with some kind of a sheet to mark off all the terrible things you've said that day. So a little bit. Did I get to your, did I respond in a way that's helpful?
Kevin, bowing. Yes, that is helpful. This might be a little aspirational, but I'm also curious about what taking responsibility looks like without the commentary. Bowing.
Yeah, that's when there's no commentary, then you see that everything is your fault. Sometimes the practice part, the path is drive all blames into one. Take everything. Everything is mine. That's the path. The fruition is seeing that you don't see anything else. So therefore you operate out of nothing else. And if someone comes to you as some kind of a temporary elseness, in other words, somebody looking at you and saying, what's for lunch, or whatever they may say, then you meet them right where they are. The necessity of dependent origination of needing to occur just occurs, but there's no one doing that. There's nothing produced. You don't know what you're going to say. If you know what you're going to say and you're planning ahead what you're going to say, then it gets well, it's less scary. And it's
Kevin,
scary. It's scary if you don't have a reference point, but the scariness is not exactly scary because there's no one who's afraid of it. So it's just like being on the edge of a cliff and not knowing if you're going to fall back onto the part of the cliff that is not the drop off or the part of the cliff that is actually the drop off. And you're just right there and you enjoy yourself. The practitioner enjoys herself with great simplicity. I'm paraphrasing the sadhana of Mahamudra. Just enjoying yourself in the middle of the difficulty. It's not sadistic or masochistic. It's just you have a deep understanding of what this is because you've been looking at it and endeavoring to train your mind without concluding things on top of it that safeguard the ego, the self-centeredness.
Kevin, bowing. Speaking of
Yes, sir.
fear or being scared, recently there's been in the last year or so, a lot of talk about defunding the police, which I've felt like, oh yeah, we should do that and redirect the money into childcare or whatever, various other opportunities. But then recently, in the last 2 weeks, there's been a lot of violence on my street, 2 shootings in New York. And suddenly my mind is like, why aren't they rounding them up? Where are the police? And so I've kind of been startled by this seeming discrepancy and a little scared of my sudden propensity for a fascistic sort of crowd control. And I wonder how I take responsibility for that and see the paradox of what might seem more like tree huggy and another one that's more mean-spirited. Bowing.
I think all of us in our society, it's so insane and crazy and polarized that all of us are going through various perambulations around this. What should we do, this or this? And you'll notice that even the people who are very supportive, very humanistic and supportive of others and are reasonable, shall we say reasonable people rather than totally unreasonable and all about power and getting somebody in charge that they can worship, as we see. down through the centuries. There's no mind training there. So you can't really solve this through politics. I'm not saying you couldn't temporarily protect it for a while in different ways, as we've seen. But I was there in the 1950s and 60s, and it was just as crazy then. It was just crazy. You can validate, say, well, what else would we have done with Adolf Hitler? Well, he had to begin somewhere, and he began in a situation where he used the nationalism, flag waving thing to gather people who didn't have any understanding and just wanted to be told what to do, and began to trust der Vaterland. And so all we can do really is train our minds. And then, as you're characterizing I say, well, where are the police? Of course, we're stuck in this hell realm. We're stuck in the six realms, which are coming and going in our mind stream and in our life stream all the time. Just as much as we can, train your mind. Try to get time so you sit down and so you realize your true nature, because this is impermanent. Human beings are, as we all know, we're all going to pass away at some point. So find out deeply who you are, and if you can, redirect the money that goes to the police to something that's more helpful. I'm not saying there isn't a relative way of being involved in that. You could, but the majority of your energy should go into seeing who you are. I mean, if you take a mistaken identity out into the world, then it gets clogged up with all the other mistaken identities that think there's somebody going somewhere is succeeding, somewhere is going towards enlightenment even. It's an incredible misunderstanding. And so find out who you are. Don't get your identity from me, from anyone. Find out who you are fundamentally. And then that which arises in your mind stream, your life stream, on the streets of Brooklyn or wherever, or I think you live in Harlem, don't you? So on the streets there, you actually treat it situationally. You see that in your own personal walking out on the street, you would relate to everyone situationally, rather than out of some blanket feeling that we need to defund the police, or some blanket feeling that we need to take the festering sore and cover it this way, cover it that way, dig it out, cover it with silkworms. I mean, there's all kinds of ideas about how to do this. We see it everywhere. And rarely do you see someone who is, whether they're a statesman or someone who is just supporting an oligarch, who really has clarity. There's fundamental clarity in their mind stream. Their ideas might be good. We all maybe have our favorite newscaster or our favorite person who's promoting possibly something even like defund the police or Black Lives Matter, all the other things that are trying to fundamentally help people, trying to find out how can we do this, our society, in such a way that we fundamentally help everyone, instead of separating out into the highly powerful rich people and the poor people down here who need to live in difficult environments and so on. It's been going on. The causes and conditions behind what we see in society have been going on for thousands, ever since human beings arrived here. Been all kinds of war. Some cultures tend to be less. Their understanding is deeper, and so therefore, but some of those cultures have also collapsed because they've been trampled into the dirt, sometimes by U.S. cavalry. So the right and wrong situation doesn't work so well, but understandings and misunderstanding, all of that needs to start with each person. That's how it looks here. So whether you join a movement to defund the police or something, that would be situational, and maybe it would be a good idea in the situation that you're speaking of. But it's so complicated, and people want to go to war with that. That sounds like what socialism. People are rail against socialism, don't even know what it is. They have no idea what socialism is. Just basically what, helping people? What's so evil about that? So I don't get off into politics. Particularly, the politics of experience are extremely complicated and are dependently risen also. Sir.
Cheers, I'm bowing. What is receiving when we are producing? Bowing.
So it's situational. And so actually noticing that what we're saying is possibly inappropriate. We're actually we're sending it to someone, but we're also have a little bit of what you could call a second opinion about it. The production has happened. But you could also be producing, and that production could be so genuine and so thoroughly coming out of the present moment that there's no force of self-centeredness behind it, and therefore you wouldn't even know what you were saying. But you're fearless because you know that you understand who you are, you understand what this is, and you can't be frightened because you live beyond right and wrong. This doesn't mean it gives you the right to abuse someone or make someone your prisoner or start or stop anything or even start a monastery. More. Let's go.
What is ignorance in that context? I'm thinking of it, I might be able to convince myself that I'm effortlessly producing something that's so instantaneous that it must be choiceless. So what is the contrast between the production that is a complete consideration of what's occurring and just not wanting to look at the impulse?
So one is the first one is you're just there, just spontaneous, and the other one is the trepidation about the spontaneity, about having some second thoughts about it. Would be one way of talking about it. Not completely willing to just be here, be present, and take the heat, no matter what it is. Very difficult if anger is showing up in your mind stream. Very difficult to just be angry and just have the heat of anger without abandoning that for who caused it or abandoning it for why it shouldn't be there. Go ahead.
Receiving something like anger, what is that? What is that? What is it to receive our own anger?
You're angry.
Oftentimes there's such a transactional mentality that I should be able to receive something, like I should be able to transact my anger. And is there a way to train with anger that's not about accomplishing receiving anger?
So I would that I could give you a more precise or a response that would help you with some kind of functionality there, but it's just return to the wall. Return to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, return to the teacher, return to the teaching, and return to the community over and over, and return to training your mind. Sit down, hold still, observe the movement of the mind, and sharpen that blade of prajna, so that when you come in, when you get off the cushion, you've heard me say this hundreds of times. I don't know of any other way to do it. It can't be done through some kind of well, do this and try this, and when this happens, then think this, or when this happened, pick up the bell and Dorje, and those are all have some kind of effectiveness in their own form, as far as working with creating forms and dissolving forms. But what you're asking about is just feel it, feel the anger without attribution. Or if you do blame someone, or blame something, or blame yourself, then just watch the blame, just observe the blame, rather than try to correct it, rather than produce something that corrects and stops it so you don't feel that way. This also means not particularly going the other way and flying into a rage or slamming your fist on the countertop. Am I getting close to what you're asking about? Is there more about it?
Yes. Using the Sangha to help us receive, is there a way to include or...
Excuse me, it has a leaf in it.
Well, that must be Yokodo's. Your flower arrangement is dropping leaves in my water. Is that dangerous?
Well, it might be a poison berry.
Oh, yeah. Could be a poison berry. Here, please.
Special for you.
See what a big production that makes. Here. What was your question?
I don't want to over elaborate it, but my impulse is to think that I'm simplifying by excluding. So if I'm having anger, thinking that I should remove myself and make things less cluttered, and I'm wondering, is there a way to utilize the forms of the three jewels, in particular the teacher and the Sangha, to help us receive our production of emotions?
So as you might want to remove yourself. Just step out. This is basically the four karmas. This is pacifying. And of all the pacifying, magnetizing, enriching, destroying, those different ways of operating in that way, just a stylized form of functioning, that's one that we can all do, just pacify. Things get too hot or heated or just too much, you're starting to want to swear at the person, then you could say, excuse me, I need to go. And you can also, if it's a dynamic where you really can't go because of the dynamic you're in, then have to, I don't know, tell the person you're going to turn away or look the other way. Sometimes, if you're doing that, there may be times when you need to step into that situation more forcefully. It needs to come out of a lot of clarity around what it is, and no blaming, just complete respect for the other person's confusion and respect for your own inability to really understand deeply what's happening there, a willingness to not know what's happening. Sometimes this is called humility. Still functioning, but no pretentiousness about you know everything and you understand and it's because of this and because of that, and that's why you're doing this and you're doing that. Right, Unyo? No more war. Don't fight. Further questions? Chisho.
Ishabhaving. Earlier on, you talked about watching the watcher. If I may call that the second watcher, is that second watcher always receiving or almost always receiving? Bhavin?
If we use that structure, there seems to be a receiving quality to that has been is depersonalized quite a bit. But there's no actual identity happening there. There's just, but you could switch right into the primary watcher, which may have a lot to say and a lot to feel. So it's just a way of talking about it. Is there another watcher? Probably not. But it's a conceptual way of saying that something about consciousness is backed up a little further. Another relative way of describing it, a little bit more, you could say, objectivity about it, about actually watching it as weather rather than as something personal. Even though it's happening in your mind stream, you're the one that's being attacked by someone, or you're the person who is one of your faults or defects or something is being pointed out by somebody very close to you. And you want to say to them, they just don't understand what you're dealing with. and there's just so many ways to handle this. I mean, you can just countless ways that you can leave what you're observing for what you think about it. One of the ways is to go to the Enneagram. Well, you're a 1, so you're this and this, and so you're a 3, and you're a. I'm not saying these aren't fun or even helpful. Of course they are. But there's no mind training there. There's just pointing out the differentiation that happens with human personality. Same thing with astrology or palmistry or looking at the I Ching or any of the other arcane practices, ways of working with the mind or with life, with experience. They have a workability to them, but they work best, and you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. And if you remember this will help you a lot, if you can really remember what I'm about to say. Don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, and certainly don't ignore it. Anytime you believe anything is true, anytime you disbelieve anything, and anytime you ignore anything, you are caught in that vortex or in that whirlwind of samsara. Even though it looks like you're going in a straight line, it's circular. You're coming back around for another dose of what? The next lifetime. Are there past lifetimes, future lifetimes? I have no idea. Not interested in that kind of information. If you're interested in that, go study it. Go read Ian Stevenson's books, which I read many years ago, proving that there is previous lives in the relative sense. Everything is possible relatively. How do you think magicians make their living? Making things that are impossible look possible.
Sure, Valley. What is objectivity that's not just becoming desensitized?
Well, being objective about the sensitivity, rather than rolling over into some kind of distance that is meant to keep you safe from that situation. Rather the distance used, if we went back to the idea of watcher of the watcher, some kind of distance that you're still there, you're still watching, but there's no protection there. There's no desensitization. You might be more sensitive because you're no longer adding on to what you're observing. You're actually seeing the raw undercarriage. You're seeing the underbelly of the whole thing. And that could be really, really powerful. Could be even disgusting, especially if you're looking at your own insanity and the way in which you, not just you, but me, any of us have really hurt others because of our own confusion, our own you could say inability, or just inability to just be responsible for who you are and what is happening in your mind stream, rather shovel it off on somebody else. As Atisha said back in the 12th century, shifting the cow's load to the ox. Blame. Nobody is to blame for anything. Sokuzan, do you have a question?
Soker and bowing, I do, and there's a question in the chat box from Eric A. Eric,
Go ahead.
is spending our time making art a form of production that doesn't interfere with the outside world in an aggressive way? Bowing.
Again, it's very situational. And my commentary on art, I studied art. I make things. I've been doing that my whole life. I don't see it as the direction it sounds like you're asking about. I don't see it that way. Make stuff. Draw pictures, paint, write poems, make up stuff. Your mind is doing it anyway. It might be interesting to just make up stuff for the fun of it, rather than make up stuff about your life and about your partner and about your sangha, or about a certain person that treated you wrong. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking about, but I think that I'm very biased here. I think if anytime you're gonna do anything with your life, the one area that I say needs to be included, you need to train your mind. You need to sit down, hold still, and watch what moves in the mind stream. And if you're watching what moves in the mind stream over time, it seems you will become more and more clear about the nature of the mind and the nature of the outside world and the nature of passion, aggression, ignorance, the three poisons. Go ahead, Chisho.
Tishavang, I want to go back to the second watcher. I just love that. It helps me. You mentioned about passion, aggression, and ignorance. I can understand the second watcher because of lack of agenda is not passive or passion or aggression. But what about ignorance? Is the second watcher never ignorant? Bhavin?
I don't think I'd go that far with those kind of concepts. The thing I would say about second watcher is it has no maintenance schedule. So it would just flash in. It would drop from the primary watcher into the secondary or the watcher of the watcher, just it would just flash in and out of that. I don't think it's something you can do. If you're endeavoring to hold still and watch the movement, then the primary watching or observing seems to happen right away, and it also might be upset about what it's seeing. But then that secondary area is just a little bit more objectivity, to use that word, a little bit more distance. I don't know if it's actual distance, but it's just looking at everything and seeing just its structure and its movement and its energy, rather than personalizing it into my energy and my mistake, their mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I need to keep my mouth shut. I need to break up with her, and all of the other stories that come up in our mind stream. So I think as far as seeing ignorance, the very nature of ignorance is not to see, not to be aware of. But ignorance is not separate from wisdom, as has been said before. They co-emerge, and wisdom and confusion or ignorance come up together. They come up together. This is what this is about. And it's not a conclusion, because if it's a conclusion, that means that something else was happening and then it got concluded. That was already the case. Sokuzan, do you have your own question now?
Sokuzan bowing, is there a polarity between the narrative that someone says about me and what I think is true about myself? Bowing.
So can you simplify? I follow you, but can you simplify that a little bit more so that my response can be more direct?
Sokuzan bowing, what is the practice when another's narrative of me is different than the narrative that I have about myself internally? Bowing.
Just receive, much as you can. Even if it's your teacher, just receive. Even if it's your son, even if it's your partner, even if it's your mom or your dad or another Sangha member or whatever, as much as you can, just receive without adding anything to it. Because if it is, depending on your relationship with that person, whatever you're producing, if that person is really respectful of you, they won't interpret your life for you. Does your teacher interpret your life?
No.
Does Ani interpret your life?
No.
Does your mom or dad?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, how do you work with them?
Sokuzan bowing, I listen.
Yeah, that's good. Just listen, but sometimes it's difficult to maintain that listener. So whatever arises out of dependent origination, don't object to it, don't agree, don't look away. So if it starts to get abrasive or difficult, maybe the best thing to do is just go the other way, just pacify it. With anybody, anytime anybody is taking your inventory or criticizing you, then only do it, even if it's your wife, or even if it's your husband, or even if it's your close. Don't overdose on that just out of some kind of ideal of I have to receive. No, receiving means receive, and then if it starts to choke up, if you actually can't receive, don't rotate into production. Don't rotate out of that. Just bow and leave. And you can do that without being impolite at all. You could say, "Sorry, I can't receive this," or you might even leave a little bit back there so that it supports them a little bit, and you don't try to do their work for them, because they need to do that work. You're not their teacher. I'm just using that as an example. But say, it doesn't seem like this is helping us to talk about this, so I'll talk to you in 3 days or a week, or I'll talk to you when I talk to you. Does that help, or is there a further question?
Sokuzan bowing, I have trouble knowing which narrative is accurate. How is everything is your fault different than self-blame? Bowing.
It's the same as, of the two, the teacher and the student, of the two. I'm going to use me because this is a powerful polarity. If anybody that looks at this person as a teacher, it's a powerful polarity, but it's only as powerful as you allow it to be, because I don't have anything to sell. I won't promise you anything. This is not merchandising. It's not a transaction at all. It's not separate. But if you don't see it, it's going to probably look somewhat transactional. But watch this situation. And if you can't do this, then you can't. But if you can do that, do this, then just receive. So the other way of saying that is that I was getting to is of the two, keep the principal witness. The teaching person will help you do that. Your partner in crime or your mother is not going to help you do that, because they're hooked on right and wrong. They're hooked on success and failure. They're hooked. The teacher is not. The teacher only sees the Buddha. Even though you're in the midst of explaining the difficulty you're having with your son or with someone in the Sangha or anything, the teacher only sees a Buddha. More about it if you have it.
So Grand Bowing, I don't at this moment. Thank you. Bowing.
What do you have, Junchu?
Question from Spool String. Sitting more, forgetting awareness less. Is being what I feel an end desire?
It's I would try to respond to your question, but it's pretty convoluted from my perception of it. It might not be from your production of this question, but if you could just button it up a little bit, there's just too much wind blowing through the armpits there. Give me a simple question, no preamble.
He has a second question. Should I attach a desire to this practice?
No. Don't do anything unless you have to. Stop practicing. Might be surprised to hear me say that. There's no sales pitch, there's no guarantee. If you want to know what I think personally that you should do, I think you should train your mind. But I have to respect what I'm going to call your confusion. I have to respect that, right? I never will be able to help you. It might be 3 years before you're ready to listen to what I'm saying, or even any Dharma teacher is saying. If the Dharma teacher is trying to get you to do something or promising you anything, as the traditional thing is, red flags should go up. If the teacher wants anything from you, the teacher wants anything for herself, demands anything. This works a little bit different in the Tibetan tradition, where the guru is the master of time and space. Not so here. Yes.
A question from Naveed in Iran.
Naveed.
What happens when you find out who you are? Does something special happen? Do you find anyone or anything new?
No.
Question from Eric Estabiro. Does receive more, produce less, with time become spontaneous and effortless like driving a car?
You could say that. Just don't give up. Return to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. What you're looking for is already the case. It's just covered up. So yes, it would be like that. But it's not, driving a car is quite a bit of fun compared to sitting practice of meditation. Driving a car is, unless you're driving through Chicago when the wind's blowing, then not so fun. Yeah, it's very much like just watching the scenery. Watch the scenery of your mind come and go, come and go, come and go. Realize your true nature. Kevin.
Bowing. Earlier you mentioned how our yammering away can kind of reify the self-centeredness, that kind of producing. Would that extend to like journaling if we're sort of like writing about our day and who did what to whom and so on. Bowing.
I don't know. I think journaling is great. Any kind of writing, any kind of production where you're expressing yourself or describing something, I think it's good. Unless there's some particular aspect of it that, like for instance, Trungpa Rinpoche, when he was talking to back in the mid 70s, Allen Ginsberg was out at Shambhala Mountain or Rocky Mountain Dharma Center and was getting, I've told this story before, getting ready to go into a 2-week solitary retreat, and he asked Rinpoche if he could take his, of course he's a poet, take his notebook in with him, and he said, no, don't take any notes. But now, if you were to ask him about that, he, not being particularly a published poet, he might look at it differently with you. He might say, well, if you have to, or he might say, well, keep it to a minimum. I sometimes tell people to write things down they're dealing with and set it right in front of them and spend half an hour looking at the wall and then spend 10 minutes just contemplating that. So I think some writing and some of that is important. I love language, so I think it's an astonishing thing that we just use for practical things rather than actually have fun with it. So.
Kevin Bowing, thank you. I remember when I did my 10-day, you told me that I was already making up enough stories and I shouldn't write any down for 10 days.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember saying that, but sounds pretty good. Bushin.
Hushin Bowing, this is kind of along the same lines, but I've noticed that when I do go into receive mode, it often opens up a channel to produce, like a lot of creative ideas come up or just, things come up. So on the cushion, it's one thing to watch them go by, but if I'm in, say, a work situation or creative situation, if I'm, on receive, a lot of things will come up and inevitably someone will say, oh, what was that? Let's do that. Oh, say that again. And I'm always like, I don't know what I just said. Like that cloud already went by. So is there a way, I don't know, like, do we need to be more aware of what we're producing?
What I do is I just keep Sokuzan close by. And that way, if I say something or anybody says something, he has such an amazing memory that I think we all use Sokuzan, don't we? If we want to remember something. So I'm being silly, but I'm saying, yes, a notebook would be good for that. Take some notes, keep some notes. Unyo's been taking notes forever, for many, many, many years. She always has a notebook. Is always writing things down.
Machine Bowing, yeah, I think I need an official note taker because when I'm writing, it's one thing when I'm writing, but if I'm, just in a conversation or something, to stop and write something down kind of almost throws it off or something. So I don't know, maybe I need to take notes at the same time in that situation. Maybe, I mean, it's so easy to forget, like I won't remember what I just said.
Okay, well, you can also get one of these little recorders, like Unyo not only takes notes, but she records here, and then it's being recorded on here, I think, also.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, you could get a little.
And I do, I record them a lot, but I guess a question would be, aside from them recording those, is there like a problem with like something with the awareness when that happens, or is it just a matter of keeping track if I want to remember? Bowing.
Well, I'm not going to do the either or, but let me say it this way. It's fine what you're doing. Fine, just sit a lot. Try to get a lot of sitting in. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement of the mind. Watch the particular way your mind or my mind or anybody's mind keeps cranking things up out of grasping, rejecting, ignorance. Get to know those particular operations in your mind stream without changing them, without fighting with them. Nothing extra.
Kurt Bowing.
Yes, Kurt.
situations or times where there could be too much receiving and not enough production?
I think situationally there could be. I'm trying to think of some situation, but you probably have something in mind. Do you have something in mind that you could share? Is it personal or?
Kurt Bowing, I guess I'm just thinking of the opposite of what you're suggesting and trying to understand if there's a balance there.
Okay, so here's how I'll address that. Most of us are producing something all the time in our thought stream. We might not be hooking up the vocal cords, but you're thinking about something, whatever it is. When I came in the Zendo and came over here and did something I never do, I just turned around and looked at everybody. What did that produce in your mind stream? Thoughts about what's happening. What is he doing now? What is he going to do next? Or something. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a little bit of a change from what normally happens. Just like eventually when I walk in here with a cowboy hat on, people are going to not be able to just receive whatever that is. They will have to add on, why has he got a cowboy hat on? Is he, what's that about? Is he, I know he likes cowboys, but.
Kurt Bowing, sometimes I guess when there's difficulty, it'll seem like I'm in a place where I'm lost in space. I'm just receiving, and I don't know.
Stay there. When I say don't maintain it, return to receiving. It's not going to be easy because as soon as we start producing, our load lightens. We feel a little better. We're expressing. We're tying into our physical manifestation, which probably feels relatively safe. We're in a room. We're in a building. The weather's fine. We just had some food, but we're having some kind of anxiety over something. And I would say, just receive this incredible world that we bypass. We go into something else, into something else, into anything but seeing what this is fundamentally. The ego mind, when it shows up, and I'm not accusing you of anything, but the ego mind, when that openness starts to show up, the ego starts to have some trepidation, and you might even come up with a question like that. Isn't there a time when I should start producing because there's just too much receiving this emptiness or this lack of reference point? So that's the way I would address that. And I'm not saying that that's true with you, but you could consider that. You could consider when you feel like you really need to produce or need to do something, or instead of just watch what moves. We'll take a final question if there is someone with a question.
Wulong Bowing.
Well,
So with regards to blame, for someone who has an exaggerated sense of responsibility sometimes, I mean, if someone commits a murder in Japan, I'm over here confessing at the 14th precinct. So I'm wondering.
I would just talk to Kevin about it.
I'm the criminal in his neighborhood, which is why I had to leave. So with regards to accepting blame or accepting responsibility, sometimes it feels like I'm actually leaving the situation. It feels like I'm ignoring. How can I work with that, given this, what I've observed myself, how I respond to things, taking this responsibility? How can I work with that differently so that it's staying?
You don't have to work with it differently. You're doing exactly what you need to do. It's just that you don't see a wider or a larger view of the whole thing. You see your particular situation, the way in which you're describing it, is you are caught in that kind of a dynamic where you feel this is true and that's true, and you're doing this and something else is doing this, and you're caught in that, and you don't see what the common way of saying the big picture. That's what about facing a wall, looking at the wall, receiving the nature of the mind. Through watching what moves in the mind, we understand that what the mind is without objects. The mind is without any description. You can't describe it. You can't find it. You can't locate it. You can't find or locate who you are and what you are. So therefore, we do what? We settle because of fear, because of that coming together of afraid of this and craving for that. We settle on some kind of identity. And so I'm saying, my response to you is just keep going. Return to the cushion. Return to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You've received vows. Return to your Bodhisattva vows that you received here a while back. Just return to those vows. Contemplate those vows. Because they are structures that you're able to conceptually look at and reflect on in consciousness. I don't see anything to move around or you could say adjust or correct with your situation at all.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-ho san shi shi-hu, shi-son mu-sa mo-ko-sa, the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.